Welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Same like Anna Sakua, I wanted to congratulate to for this project. And during my presentation, I would like to speak about energy communities, and this might be another topic that might be very interesting for you, and hopefully your project will be like a basis to investigate other topics, and hopefully energy communities will be one of them, because I see that they require a lot of support and legal actions, as legal and advocacy and campaign building, awareness building actions. First question is whether you can see my presentation.
Yes,
right
perfectly.
now.
Thank you.
Okay, amazing then. As Shaba mentioned, I'm Anna Frączek. I work for Client Earth in Poland, and today I will be speaking about energy communities and their rights and available legal tools. My presentation is a first part of presentation I provide together with Josh Roberts. He will dwell more into details. My presentation is more introductory and general. Okay, I think that we should start. First of all, I would like to introduce the concept of energy communities. Energy communities are bottom-up local initiatives which are led by citizens, local authorities, small and medium-sized enterprises. And these people who live not far away from each other, and these institutions, entities, they come together to engage in energy-related activities, mostly to produce, manage, and share renewable energy from the community-owned, together shared, build, and renewable energy sources. Energy communities are bottom-up initiatives, and they are democratically governed. They are autonomous and controlled by their members. And what is important, energy communities are local initiatives and bottom-up initiatives, and they do not operate for profit. So this is the biggest difference between energy communities and big power utilities. The key goal of energy communities is to provide benefits for at the local level for their members, and if energy community generates some profit, it should be reinvested at the national level, and the members of energy community decide how to spend this extra revenues, extra profits they were able to generate together as a energy community. Why do we need energy communities? Well, energy communities usually like the goal is to create energy communities that generate energy from the renewable energy sources, mostly from solar and wind installations. And they can significantly contribute to the EU climate goals, reducing helping us to roll out renewable energy sources at the local level. These energy sources are community owned by the local community, by the owners of the renewable, by the owners of the energy community. When something belongs to the local community, and we are directly engaged into energy production at the local level, the acceptance of renewable energy projects increase. Therefore, energy communities help to help us to change how people see renewable energy projects. They want to engage in them. They accept when solars onto wind turbines are built in their neighborhood because they can benefit from them, and they engage in the production of energy communities. It is another great benefit that energy communities bring. Energy communities can teach their members and the local community what is energy and how people start to connect the dots, that they generate energy and they use energy they generated. So slowly they also change their behaviors, the patterns of the way how their enterprises or households operate. And energy communities also help to change our habits, daily habits, into more sustainable, to reduce energy demand, to increase energy efficiency, and help us better manage energy. And what is important, especially these days, because as we are all aware, especially as people who live in Central and Eastern Europe, and we live in the time which is where we face a very great uncertainty, and it is mostly due to climate change and also due to geopolitical situation. Energy communities are local initiatives which can help us build local resilience. What do I mean saying local resilience? It is about energy security. The energy is generated at the local level from the renewable energy sources, and people can share this energy between them at the local level. It is a new approach, the local to the energy security, which is dispersed and decentralized and democratically owned. Moreover, energy communities help to improve local economy. They create new job opportunities, new business models. They can also reduce, and I should mention it about this before, energy from renewable sources is cheaper. So energy communities help to lower energy bills. In last years, each of us faced this, faced the energy crisis, and we faced the rising prices of the energy. Energy communities help to reduce the bills, to stabilize, and to keep energy prices on the similar levels, so we are not so dependent so much to the fluctuality of the energy prices on the global markets. Energy communities also gather the community together, learn, teach how to cooperate, and strengthen the local community. And energy communities can be used as an element of preparedness in the situation when we face the risk of military conflict. They help us to build local sources of energy which is renewable, which can deliver energy for the local community in case of extreme weather events, in example caused by climate change, or also in case of other kind of geopolitical risks. Energy communities were introduced to the EU law by Clean Energy for All Europeans package some time ago. It was between 2018 and 2019. And they were introduced in the EU law. We've got two concepts of energy communities: renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities. Since that time, member states were obliged to correctly and fully transpose these directives. The deadline to transpose renewable energy directive was 2020. It was mid-2021. For internal energy market directive, it was 2020. The full and effective transposition and implementation of EU directives is crucial for development of energy communities at the national level, and it is the obligation of the member states to fulfill this transposition obligation. Why it is important to fully transpose EU directives? First of all, having in mind that energy market is very complex, highly regulated, and dominated by very big, large power utilities, big corporations with great budgets and know-how, and a number of professionals. The transposition of only these definitions of renewable energy, of energy communities, it is not enough. However, EU directives put on member states the obligation not only to transpose legal definitions of energy communities, but also Article 22 of Renewable Energy Directives imposed on member states obligation of establishing enabling framework. And this enabling framework is quite precisely like elements of this enabling framework are already enumerated and are included in the EU directives. And to establish enabling framework is necessary to ensure a level playing field for bottom-up energy communities at the national level, which is necessary to let them compete with big utilities. And to ensure a level playing field for energy communities, there is a need for favorable regulations. We need to ensure that establishing and operating energy community is easy and accessible for unprofessional entities and households who want to create energy community. Dedicated support schemes are also crucial because investment in renewable energy installations is costly and requires a lot of funding, as well as active promotion of energy communities. In energy communities, concept is not widely recognized, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. In September 2025, as a Kleindorf, we made a we commissioned a public opinion survey, which proved that 90%, 90%, of the responders to our survey was unable to recognize the concept of energy communities. So it shows how low is the awareness even after a number of years after introducing the concept of energy communities to the national law in Poland. Why is energy communities still systemic barriers, and we see not so many of them at the national level? We should expect a definitely higher number of them, having in mind that deadline for the transposition of the EU directives passed nearly 6 years ago now. However, today a number of member states still the member states failed to fully and correctly transpose EU directives, even though a number of member states have regulation, have definition of the energy communities at the national level. These entities are unable to operate. They are still a new concept, and we do not have, in example, secondary legislation. They do not have support schemes, and so despite formally the directives are partly transposed, nothing works in practice, unfortunately. One of the problems are unclear and inconsistent definitions of the energy communities, which led to a lot of problems. Josh will explore this topic a little bit more in a moment. Another thing are administrative barriers and a lack of support. It is crucial because if we want to engage society into energy-related activities, we need to make it easy, accessible, and we need to provide one-stop shops. We need to provide know-how and support for these pioneers, leaders who want to start, establish, and then operate energy communities. We need to do everything to encourage them to do this. However, prolonged administrative barriers, when you need to wait, in example, 2 years for the final decision, and quite often this decision is negative, it prevents development of energy communities at the national level. And as I mentioned before, no level playing field and low awareness. 90% of the people of the society in Poland does not recognize energy communities. I can bet that for a number of countries, of member states, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, these numbers can be very, very similar. At the same time, member states, the governments are obliged to promote this concept of energy communities at the national level. We've got some good news. We expect good news from the European Commission, from the Brussels level in the next month. Commission announced publication of Citizen Energy Package, which will be a proposal of new measures, new hopefully regulatory frameworks to enhance development of citizen the key goal of this package is to empower citizens to participate in energy transition and to tackle energy poverty. Energy communities are a great example of this kind of engagement and empowerment of the local community. And hopefully this citizen energy package will help us to enhance people, to strengthen energy communities, and to make them shine and develop. Citizen energy packet is very needed for this moment. We expect that it will reopen public debate on energy community, will strengthen current regulatory frameworks, and encourage Commission to take proactive enforcement and approach to energy communities. And it is very needed because despite the Commission proposed citizen energy package and new measures, the EU directives are still not fully transposed, and we need to enforce them. We need to ensure full transposition of the existing regulatory framework to make a next step to develop energy communities and to support them more. However, we need adequate legislation and regulations at the national level to make it possible. Therefore, in our opinion, we need legal actions. Strategic litigation and legal actions can influence public policy and remove system barriers. It can enforce energy communities' rights. It can hold member states accountable for failing to transpose EU directives, as well as can raise public support to drive systemic change to change existing regulation. The strategic pathways for legal intervention can be recognized on 2 levels: at the national level and the EU level. A comprehensive legal strategy to enforce rights of energy communities should start at the national level, and then, however, should be also prepared to be escalated at the EU level, which is, of course, a further step and which requires a very solid preparation. At the national level, we can focus on individual cases the proceedings can be faster and we can receive more direct impact. National authorities have a good understanding of domestic regulations and local context and can address very specific barriers. At the same time, at the EU level, it is a place where we can address systemic structural issues. It requires longer and more preparation of the intervention at the EU level is more resource consuming. It requires definitely more longer preparation, and we need to show very serious and recurring violation of the EU law, which is always a challenge. However, we can hold member states accountable for failing EU directives and also provide systemic change in the country, in the member states, and also reopen discussion and push for change of the regulations at the EU level. When it comes to legal avenues at the national level, we've got a number of them. One of them is complaint to the national ombudsperson, which of course requires individual case and the violation of the human rights. However, it can and despite it is not beaten, it can successfully shape public debate and provide extra support to advocate for the change of law at the national level. There is a complaint to the regulatory authority. This complaint is pretty accessible. It is fast and can bring tangible results. However, requires submitting complaint to the regulatory authority, with which energy communities pretty often on which decisions energy communities are pretty often dependent and would prefer to maintain a good relationship. At the same time, possible are actions before national court. Having a court decision helps to enforce the rights of the energy community, and then in the longer term can lead to the change of the national law. At the same time, there are possible legal actions at the EU level. One of them is complaint to the European Commission, which is very promising, however, very difficult and long and difficult proceeding, which requires also a lot of time and engagement. And it is necessary to prove a systemic violation of the EU law at the national level, and it also requires, as I said, good cooperation and a lot of effort to prepare. Another way, it is not judicial, but also we can say it is a legal avenue, is petition before the European Parliament, which of course has a very promising. It is a very promising way to foremost raise awareness and stimulate to and enhance public discussion about energy communities at the EU level in the European Parliament. In Kleindorf, we've got a project which is focused on energy communities. We are happy to launch legal actions. We work on this project since over a year, and our key goal is to hold member states accountable for failing comply EU directives and ensuring they meet their obligations. For now, we are focused on 4 target. I'm sorry. It is right now. It is even 5 target jurisdictions, because I missed to add Bulgaria here. We plan to we explore the potential to initiate legal actions. Therefore, we are very happy to hear some input. You are welcome if you would like to engage, would like to provide input on energy communities in your member states, in your country, we are very happy to hear. We are ready to help if energy communities, if the citizen society or NGOs as lawyers would like to start intervention. We are here to help. Our goal, as I said, is foremost holding member states accountable for failing to comply EU directives. We want to ensure a level playing field for energy communities. So in the parallel to legal actions, we also undertake targeted advocacy, and we try to push for amendment of the existing regulatory frameworks at the national level. As well as we want to empower energy communities by raising awareness and capacity building, providing workshops, and also launching a communication campaign to spread, to raise awareness, to learn the society about the concept of energy communities.
Anna, excuse me.
Yeah,
I
I
hate to be.
finished. This
Okay, that's okay.
two last slides.
Thank you.
It is exactly what I wanted to say. I do not have enough time to explore the topic of legal tools for energy communities. However, I encourage you to take a look to explore this to explore it in our publication, which you can see here. I'm happy to share a link to this publication about legal tools for energy communities. You can always contact also Kleindorf. And also, we launch a dedicated website for energy communities where we will publish a very short animation and Q&A about energy communities, which can be helpful to make workshops, to learn, to teach about energy communities, and to raise public awareness. This is all from my side. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer your questions now and after the meeting as well.
And so my name is Josh Roberts. I was the head of policy at ResCoop EU. I worked there for 9 years and helped to usher in the clean energy package provisions on energy communities and self-consumption, actually. I started that work actually at Kleinters. So it's funny how these collaborations just kind of continue. And I'm gonna kind of I mean, one of the things that I've been doing since I decided to leave ResCoop was to focus more on this topic because I've spent over a decade of my life working to get this stuff into legislation. And as Anya said, it provides some very unique opportunities, but that are based in rights. But we also need to make sure that those rights are enforced. And I think that this avenue provides a new way to look at the role of citizens and local communities in environmental and in the climate and energy landscape. So I mean to kind of like sort of start where we left off. Let's see here. Can you guys see that? Okay. Yeah,
Maybe to
yeah.
activate this
Yeah, let me
oh
sorry.
yes.
Yeah, let me go
Yeah, down
into
there.
there we go. Okay, that's much
Absolutely.
better.
Very
Sorry
good.
about that.
Yes. No, no, no. That's
Yeah. So Anya already mentioned the scope of the work that we are doing. So we're kind of the guide that Anya mentioned is very pertinent here. We're basically using one of the avenues. I won't explicitly state which one, but you know, for those of you that are paying attention, you can probably figure it out. We're basically looking at issues from the ground in 5 different member states. And what I'm going to do in this presentation is kind of go through an overview of some of the issues that we have discovered so far. Just to preface this, that and for some of the legal experts that have also helped us, because we've relied on legal expertise from the ground in each of these countries, and some of them are here today. So feel free to chirp in if I misstep on and say something wrong. And their work has been invaluable in this. I will mention a couple of other member states in this because So ResCoop has basically been gathering sort of the state of play on implementation on energy communities across member states through a couple of different projects. First, there's a transposition tracker that we developed some years ago to look and actually grade different legal frameworks for energy communities, including the definitions and enabling frameworks. And we've also developed through a couple of service contracts through the European Commission some pretty I would say comprehensive fiches that basically describe the national framework. So if you are interested in this presentation and kind of want to go back and look at the legal framework in your own country to see how well it's being implemented, there are tools that are publicly available for you to sort of dive in. Just to also, before I dive into the country analyses, I just also wanted to highlight what we are focusing on here because there's two definitions. We're really just focusing on renewable energy communities. This is mainly the one that's focused on local. It's around production of renewables, and the governance requirements are a little bit more aimed towards democratic decision making and eligibility there. So that's what we wanted to focus on. So we've really focused on the definitions because those are contained of certain principles that actually, what I would say, distinguish an energy community from any other market actor. I think that's important because they are, in essence, market actors. And why does that matter? Because they are small, they're located very geographically centered in a particular municipality or region. They bring together people who are not necessarily active in the energy system, and their motives are much different from your traditional commercial market actor. Again, that doesn't mean they're not getting profits, but the profits are going to the community purposes as opposed to the individual pockets of shareholders. So those are very important. Otherwise, we're not really talking about much. Then we're also looking at the assessment of barriers and potential at national level. This is a requirement for member states. And what we basically call this is the homework assignment. This is what the member states need to do. They need to study the ground as it exists and what is the interest from society to form these energy communities. And that report basically provides the analytical basis for what we call the enabling framework. And this is really important because rights, they are quite explicitly enumerated in EU legislation. It's very easy for member states to literally copy and paste them into national law, but actually making sure that citizens and the communities can exercise those rights is entirely dependent on the enabling framework. So that is a critical key aspect. And then there's also another part of that, which is access to renewable support schemes. That has been one of the main levers of national governments to sort of get renewables up and running. And there are a lot of competition issues that come into play there. The important links here that we are making with this analysis, again, we are looking at consumer rights, so rights of citizens to participate in energy communities, but also the rights of the energy communities themselves as market actors. That's, for me, probably an even more important one because as citizens, we know, sometimes we don't feel like we have much rights. Well, the EU was basically founded on an internal market. So companies, whether we like it or not, clearly have a little bit more of a legal standing there. And so now we're talking about something bigger, so like an actual market actor that can move its weight around if it would like to. So I think that's an important emphasis for this. And one of the implications of that is around equality and non-discrimination in the marketplace. And this is very important because we basically acknowledge energy communities as a distinct type of market actor, which is actually eligible and in need of special privileges and rights. That's why we have the enabling framework there in the first place. Okay. And then, of course, you have the regulator, which needs to oversee this framework, needs to make sure that there's no funny business, no abuse of the concept going on, either by the energy communities or by companies who might, as we like to call, capture or co-opt the community energy movement. So what I'm going to do here is just go through some of the stuff that we found, just to demonstrate some trends of issues that we have noticed For those of you that would be interested, this might just kind of give you an idea of things that you might see in your own country, because there are trends that are not just occurring in one member state, and we'll see that as we go through, because we're only talking about 5 member states, but for a lot of these issues, we already see issues that are common across. So one of the biggest challenges we see is I call it faux transposition. We can also call this copy and paste transposition. This is basically where the member state just copies and pastes the legislation and it says, okay, we've transposed. And when it comes to the definitions, this is really, it's actually counterproductive, because, for instance, in Bulgaria, they literally have a transposition that's copy and paste, but they have no regulator to oversee that definition. And now basically any company can come in. They know it's not going to be checked, but they can also kind of say they meet these requirements without pointing to any certain standard or reference. So it's really important that this be clarified in national law. And also for the actual energy communities that want to set themselves up, it's also, they need a lawyer, they need to get advice. And if nothing is clear, then everything is risky, because you don't know what will be accepted and what will not. So that's already one of the big flags here. Another one, interestingly, is suitability of legal forms. Member states have wide discretion on what type of legal forms they allow to be an energy community. But what we see is that sometimes it's not enumerated at all. It says, the legal framework will say any legal form can be an energy community as long as they comply with the principles. But some others actually will state this legal form applies, this legal form applies. And to give an example of Bulgaria, what we see is that the legal forms that do apply are actually not really relevant. It's a little bit harder for local authorities and citizens to participate in these legal forms, but it's quite easy for companies to do it. So already here we see a little bit of a kind of almost, I would call it like a more implicit discrimination. That on its face, it might look, okay, there's lots of options out there. But if you dig down into the practice, you actually see, who's actually forming these legal entities? What does the legal framework actually look like that might stand in the way of bringing different actors, natural persons, SMEs, and local authorities together? And we also see that a lot of countries are defining energy communities very narrowly, largely around self-consumption or collective self-consumption. And strictly from a conceptual standpoint, it wouldn't make sense if energy communities were doing that, because you already have Article 21 of the Renewables Directive, which is explicitly on individual and collective self-consumption. So if, the fact that a lot of governments conflate this, to give some of them the benefit of the doubt, I think we just don't really, we kind of have an understanding that they really don't understand what an energy community is. But I think some of them probably do understand this, and it's easy for them to kind of, put it in a box and say, okay, you guys can do this, but you won't be able to do anything else in practice, really. And that can be everything from limiting them, to the electricity sector or to producing renewable gas. But it raises a lot of questions about whether these communities, which have the rights to exercise, across the energy sector, how can they get engaged in education and awareness raising? What if they want to do thermal heating and cooling? District heating is a very popular and localized topic at the moment. So, and this just a general lack of legal coherence. A lot of member states will link a renewable energy community definition to the citizen energy community definition, but they will do so in a very poor way. And it leaves a lot of practical legal questions that we've seen, lawyers at the national level are just getting questions from applicants and they're really not sure what they're able to do. And we've also seen drastic legal changes, like in Greece. They had a legal framework, they had definitions, and now all of a sudden they've said those don't apply anymore, or they won't apply. So we create a new definition, and guys, you have to figure it out, and you have to register as a new entity if you want to continue your activities. And in Greece, you had over 1,000 energy community initiatives. Now, a lot of these were project-based, and there was a lot of corporate capture, but there were also a lot of genuine, unique, localized initiatives. And that costs money. And it also reduces trust. So, it's not really in the spirit when we're talking about developing enabling framework to help energy communities get off the ground and to grow. We're also seeing some specific aspects of the individual principles. So here I've listed some of the main governance principles that are included. Autonomy. Lots of member states say we don't understand what autonomy means, and some of them just completely leave it out of the legislation, which I find very funny because we literally got a reference to autonomy in the recitals, which actually states what it means. So it's not like anybody can put their head in the sand. This is really big. I've also put Austria. I have a big hang up with Austria because they just haven't included it, and they've done a lot of things well. Um, but this is really problematic because it also has a knock-on effect for effective control. And it means that a lot of companies can sort of set up, individualized energy communities where they are kind of the main actor in there. They might even be a single member and they're setting it up. And that's literally what autonomy is supposed to prevent. It's supposed to prevent control from a single member or an outside party who's either providing finance or services to the energy community. So either we see it's missing or we see that there's not really a clear or consistent standard or that there are even loopholes. We've seen this in Greece, for instance. Actually, the regulator has caught it after the fact, and I think they've rectified it. But we see that if it's not really paid attention to at the national level, then there's a lot of abuse that can occur. Eligibility as well. We see this in countries where this is an energy community and renewable energy community definitions are linked. Normally, only SMEs, small and low and micro enterprises should be able to participate in this because again, it's local. But we are actually seeing that in some member states, they've said that large enterprises can participate. And again, this really emphasizes the corporate capture aspect where large utilities can come in or large companies industrial companies can come in and kind of create their own, take the topic for themselves. And ownership as well. There's kind of this debate going on about whether or not leasing is a form of ownership. Because if you lease a renewable energy installation, you own the production, but you don't own the asset. For me, the real where this argument fails is that it undermines autonomy because if you don't own your asset, there's no way for you to control how that asset is liquidated or what happens to it if the energy community goes bankrupt. It really leaves the energy community as kind of like a taker, and that's really not the point here. And the non-commercial purpose. So when we're talking about, not-for-profit, what does that mean? Some countries have defined that rather narrowly to say that you can't have a return on investment. And that kind of, again, defeats the purpose of having an energy community in the first place, because the idea is to generate economic benefits so that you can use them for community purposes. So these are all, you can kind of link them to the violation of rights. One issue in particular as well, because again, we mentioned that energy communities are based locally. So it's around this concept of geographical proximity. Again, I mentioned we see a lot of conflation with energy sharing, where the standards that are defined for control or for participation it really only fits with the activity for energy sharing. So, for instance, if you wanted to do district heating, or even if you wanted to develop a wind project or set up a one-stop shop, or focus on housing renovations, this might be difficult for you. Your community might be required to stay small, or even if you wanted to set up a local supplier, you want to grow a little bit, you will be inherently limited by some of these aspects. And we've even seen that some areas are just completely off limits for renewable energy communities. Some of them have been limited to urban areas or rural areas. I think in Poland, it's, Anya, shake your head if it's correct. They're limited to rural areas at the moment, and people want to set them up in urban areas.
It was changed recently.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So yeah, that's
But
thanks to
you are right. It was 3 years. It was limited.
Yeah, exactly. But in Bulgaria, you're not allowed, unless you get a rezoning, you're not allowed to install renewables on agricultural land, and that includes agricultural buildings. So and cooperatives are actually one of the legal entities that should be able to set up an energy community. Um, and energy cooperatives in Bulgaria are centered around rural activities. So it means an agricultural cooperative may be able to set up an energy community, but they can't even use their own infrastructure if they want to do that. They have to go through an additional hurdle to get those set up. So that's a barrier. Um, I mean, in terms of the assessment, so just some of these either, the general trends are it either hasn't been done yet and it's in national legislation, so it's just not being implemented, or there's been a very poor quality. I won't go through each because I'm probably already talking too long, but you can kind of get an idea of how those are going. And the enabling frameworks. So again, this is probably, I think when we look at the definitions, that's more about making sure we are actually having an adoption of a concept that we would like to see. The enabling framework is actually to make sure that energy communities can thrive and grow. And one of the things that you first need to do is set up a registration process. And this has been a really tricky topic too, because usually this is done by the regulator, and the regulator is used to licensing activities. Like if you want to become a supplier or a DSO, they are used to looking at this type of stuff. They're not used to looking at what is an energy community. Do they comply with the governance criteria and autonomy? That's a headache for them. They don't like it. They need to do it, but they don't like it. So usually what we've seen is they have either there is no registration procedure, so no energy community has the ability to be acknowledged, or we see this blending of the acknowledgement process and it actually licensing activity in Croatia. The situation should be getting better, but originally, I mean, if you wanted to set up an energy community, you needed to basically go through an entire licensing procedure similar to a fully fledged retail supplier or a DSO, and that's just not how energy communities work. Um, We've also seen that you can only set up an energy community if you have a renewable energy electricity production installation, which again, it's putting energy communities into a box. Um, and in Portugal, they actually have to have it for collective self-consumption. So you couldn't just collectively invest in a project somewhere. And actually, you have cooperative DSOs that have existed for almost a millennia, and they cannot register as an energy community because they don't have a collective self-consumption installation attached to them. Um, we also see issues of lack of available information, so no one-stop shops, no guidance, no templates for contracts, no access to technical expertise. These are all things that a lot of member states have set up, but they just simply don't exist in other countries. And probably an even bigger gap, we're seeing that like there's a provision that is supposed to ensure that vulnerable and lower income households are able to access energy communities. I mean, this might change with the Social Climate Fund because we were able to get energy communities in there, but it's just simply not really touched upon when we're talking about this. So it's kind of just missing. Um, Access to operational support schemes. So this is like feed-in tariffs or feed-in premiums. It's basically a top-up that you would get on the market price once your project is operational so that you can make revenue on what you produce. There are specific provisions that ensure that energy communities should be able to access these support schemes. They're usually not able to because they're smaller and all of these schemes are market-based or tendered, like tender procedures. And those are really like gaming exercises for large companies. They are usually hedging. They're doing tricky, they gamify the whole thing. And a small energy community is simply not able to do that. So they really are operating on a different level. And there are provisions in the Renewable Energy Directive to ensure that they are adequately acknowledged in the procedure to set these things up, but also that once the schemes are set up, that there is a level playing field for renewable energy communities. And we've just seen, we have some good practice, but in the member states I mentioned here, that they don't exist. Um, And again, the regulator plays a very key role here. But in some countries they haven't been assigned to oversee, and we already see abuse from large energy companies coming in and just sort of, or even some municipalities. I mean, I don't want to bash municipalities, but if it's a single municipality setting up a community project so that they can share electricity among their own buildings, you can do that. You don't need to set up an energy community for that. But they're basically doing this to access state funds, public funds that are really supposed to be there for mixed initiatives to bring different actors together. So, I mean, I think the last thing I'll mention here, which is why does any of this matter? I mean, other than a legal compliance perspective, I think here we come back to, the status of an energy community as a market actor and where we see sort of discrimination taking place. There are particular notable instances of this. We found them in at least 3 countries, and we'll be continuing to look at this. But I mean, the fact that Bulgaria, for instance, doesn't have any standardization around their definitions, what we've basically seen is that companies have been setting up quasi-energy communities to access these small pilot schemes where public money is given, and they don't have to follow any of the EU requirements. Nobody's checking, nobody cares, so they just sign up. And energy communities, initiatives that would like to set these things up, they just don't. They're not able to play the game. And I already mentioned the practicalities around the legal forms that are available. Again, it's not explicit, but I would say it's more implicit discrimination against energy communities, or I would say against households, like actual people who want to do this, because there are very few avenues for them to set these up. And there's also a connection to regulated prices, because if you understand anything about regulated prices, it's basically the government coming in, capping the price. The public is still paying for it because the government is giving money to top up for the whole energy bill, but that's basically a subsidy to the large energy companies. And if you join an energy community, you lose your access to these regulated prices. And energy communities, they don't have a support scheme available, so there's kind of a double whammy. You have a disincentive to join an energy community, but the energy community actually can't give you a good price. So it's basically a losing proposition economically. Poland's a very interesting case because they have sort of 2, I would call them parallel concepts. I mean, they have energy cooperatives, and you might be able to say that they are energy communities, except for the fact that they have a distinct energy community definition in place. And you also have this third concept called energy clusters. And what they've done around these 2 alternative concepts, they've given them access to virtual net metering. That has been phased out, but they're going to virtual net billing. And they also have a litany of other exemptions on network charges, or energy bill related charges, and licensing exemptions. But these are not available to an energy community, which is, the member states had one job to do, which is to provide an enabling framework to energy communities. And instead of doing that, they basically provided it to somebody else. So for me, this is actually the most obvious instance of discrimination here. I mean, and Hungary is kind of it's sort of a mix between these 2. I mean, you have a regulator that doesn't check compliance with the principles. It doesn't have a good definition, so it doesn't have autonomy in it. It doesn't say what the principles actually are. It allows large entities to participate. So there are a lot of issues with the energy communities, the so-called energy communities that have been set up, and just everybody's turning a blind eye to it. While at the same time, again, if you actually want to share energy through a renewable energy community, you will lose your access to your universal service provider, and you will lose access to your capped prices. So there's a systemic disincentive there for you to actually join an energy community. So, I mean, I've already gone on way too long, so thank you for bearing with me. Just some kind of considerations, because Anya mentioned these already. What I've kind of described are these systemic cases where they kind of they're going to affect the environment for energy communities generally. I mean, if you are looking to do, if there's something you want to do to bring like a complaint to the European Commission, this is kind of what you're going to be looking for. If you're looking at individual instances, you're probably going to be looking at something at the national level. There's also, and this is linking it back to Anya's presentation, there's an efficacy question you want to ask yourself when you're looking at different options. Should I go to the European Commission? It's not going to cost very much. It might have little impact, but it might be useful for something else. I mean, you do have complaints to the NRA, and Anya did mention that, a lot of communities have to work with the NRA, but it's not also complaining to the regulatory authority about the regulatory authority. You can also complain to the regulatory authority about somebody else. And namely, the DSO is a very good, the system operator. They're the ones that connect you to the grid. And they like to play a lot of games with smaller projects, it seems. But there are some rights that they have to there are obligations they have to comply with at the national level, and if they're not following them, you can go complain to them about them to the regulator, and I think the ombudsman is also maybe an easy way to get where you need to go. I think there's another question you should ask yourself: are we just looking to use strategic litigation as a way to change the national situation, to put pressure on decision makers, or are we talking about setting a legal precedent? That will determine your strategy. And I mean, again, I think sometimes this is also about, making voices heard and timing. And I will link this back to something that Anya said at the end of her presentation, which is the Citizen Energy Package. That is not the only thing that's coming. There's also a European Court of Auditors report that will be released, which is actually auditing the EU as a whole, but it's also auditing a few different member states. I think Romania, Poland, the Netherlands, and maybe Italy, if I remember correctly. And this will be getting more conversation in the future, but the EU will be revising its 2030 legal framework. And I have heard that the energy communities provisions are likely to be on the table for some revision. So aside from all of the political implications of that, it is important for us now. And what I mean, I will also put this in another, maybe a little bit more dire context. We've seen a lot of deregulation on the agenda of the Commission, and my personal feeling is that energy communities are on the list of things that the Commission may open in order to make it easier for companies to come in rather than harder. So I would say on this whole, on the definitions, if this is something you care about, I would, litigation or challenges to the Commission can also show the Commission that people actually care about these provisions. Because if the Commission doesn't hear how important that people feel these things are, they will have a stronger social license to change these things. The more pressure they feel from the national level, from the actors that are the beneficiaries of these rights, the harder time they will actually have of removing them.
Josh, I hate to
Sorry,
be
yeah. I mean, yeah, I'll leave the last one if somebody wants to ask a question about it. But yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it, and yeah, I hope this didn't bore you guys.
Sorry, but
No, it's
this
okay.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm trying to work out my slide sharing, but I will start talking, being fully mindful that I have to catch up some time. I'm going to talk about an issue where Austria is not on a front-running line, which is climate policy. And I want to talk a bit about the Müllner versus Austria case. It's a climate litigation case before the European Court of Human Rights, a case that I filed 3 months after Klimaseniorinnen. So it's actually been filed quite a while ago, but it's now sort of in process. It got granted priority status soon after the decision. We've had some legal observation exchange, and I'm expecting a judgment this year. So you put up the presentation
Yeah,
for
actually
me.
I did. I found it.
You know
So
what? That's perfect.
I can step the slides for you.
Yeah, the slides are just a background sort of to keep you entertained, and I'll just continue talking. So why do I think this case has been pushed back? I think it does make sense for two reasons. First of all, it will be the case where the court has to make a decision regarding individual victim status. What kind of individual can successfully sue a state based on human rights violation in the sphere of climate? And secondly, what makes this case quite interesting is the fact that Austria is a member of the European Union. And so now we have to deal with the interplay of European climate law, domestic law, and human rights law. You can put on the next slide. But what is, just go through all the bullets. And let me maybe start with the facts that sort of at the core of this case. You see my client here, Mr. Müllner. Mr. Müllner suffers from something that's called the Uthoff syndrome. What is it? It is a syndrome that makes the symptoms of his disease worsen with the increase in temperature. So he has multiple sclerosis. Officially, he would be called a disabled person because in his case, the MS means that he has a lack of ability to move, but he can move, just not as sort of smoothly and fast as we do. But when it gets warmer, so on a sunny day when we go out swimming, he has to sit in a wheelchair. So the picture was taken in spring, not in summer. And when it gets really hot, he has to either sit in an electric wheelchair because he can't push the wheelchair by himself, or he is sort of isolated in his house. The interesting thing about him is that he's actually quite a well-adapted individual. He's living in one of the coldest regions in Austria in a passive house. And yet in 2024, we've calculated that it was 2.7 months that he had to stay inside or sort of live a life as a fully disabled person. And so the fact that Austria doesn't even have a domestic regulatory framework in place makes him sue Austria because his symptoms of disease worsen because of climate crisis, and Austria is not doing its part. We have a climate act that is still in place but has run out of targets since 2021. We are also not on track to reach EU targets. And we don't have a procedural framework in place that would allow him to actually effectively file a case to make that claim. And so this case is very much about Article 8 and Article 13. So that's at the core. There is an Article 6 claim that has to do with sort of more procedural issues within the domestic procedure. But because that's not so much of international and European relevance, but more of domestic relevance, I'm going to leave that one out. And so the question that this sort of case poses, the first one is Müllner the first individual that can pass victim status? Can he show the pressing need of protection that is required? And for that reason, you can go to the next slide. We have worked quite closely with a lot of scientists. So we have medical statements that show that he suffers from Uthoff syndrome, and luckily Austria doesn't challenge that fact. So this is a given in the proceeding already that he has this syndrome. The question is whether or not this is severe enough to pass the victim status. We have worked with climate scientists that provided us with a lot of data and modeling and projection on the numbers of days above 25 and above 30 degrees in his particular home region. And then we've also supported with a more sort of broader study that has been done by the University of Oxford and a consortium, an international one, that is looking at the impacts of heat for MS patients in Austria for different regions and sort of to see how that impacts their illnesses and their symptoms of disease, to whether actually really show whether that assumption that it gets worse only applies to his particular home region, or we're faced with a more sort of broader tendency here. So we've went into a lot of detail because so far no individual has passed that status because of the lack of documentation. So the court makes that door deliberately sort of small, and the question is it going to open or not? Personally, I wonder if the court is actually denying victim status to Mr. Müllner. I wonder who is able to pass it. And then maybe nobody is. Maybe that's also a way of dealing with it, to say it is a collective issue. This should be represented by NGOs where the court has been, opening up a very broad standing or not. I mean, the impact that it has in the long run is that as an individual, you're obviously more capable of filing damage claims. We haven't filed a damage claim because this is a strategic litigation intending to open doors, but obviously if that passes, then you could have individuals who would kind of also request damages on top of regulatory changes. So that is the first big bulk of that case. The second big bulk is that Austria is saying, well, it doesn't really matter whether we have a Climate Protection Act and whether we have targets or what have you, because we are members of the EU, and the EU climate law and all that regulatory framework that is sort of attached to it, that suffices. That's enough to meet the standards set out by the court in Klimaseniorinnen. Now, the interesting thing here is that the EU's own scientific advisory board, the ESAB, has said that the EU is not on track to meet the 1.5 target. Now, in a way that doesn't really come as a surprise, because we're all reading the news and we know sort of 1.5 is out of the window, but yet that is the legal obligation on the Convention of Human Rights set out by the court. And so the ESAB wrote a couple of reports, and one of them is around the 2040 target. And there it said that even if the EU reduces 90 to 95% of emissions by 2040, it will still not meet the 1.5 target, to the lowest level of fairness, and has to offset. So the EU as such is not on track. However, from a strategic litigation perspective, I don't think it's very successful to go in all the way to say, well, the EU itself is not doing enough, because that would put the court in a very tricky position. I mean, being fully mindful of what is going on in the world and how the US is doing a completely different turn on things, and a lot of EU countries are more critical towards the rulings of the court when it comes to climate and environment. So the main argument put forward in the proceedings at the moment, all of them out there, but the main focus would be to try and establish that the court is saying, well, we do face here two complementary regimes. One is a collective regime of minimum standards by the EU, which is trying to set up, this is a bare minimum that the member states have to do according to our framework. It's a collective target. And the other one is the state individual obligation stemming from a human rights perspective. And these two are not in conflict. They complement each other quite well. And therefore, you can't really use the EU as a shield in a human rights litigation. So that is the main sort of tone that's running. Whereas, obviously, we are also talking about the finding of the ESAB report, and we are also talking a lot about budgets and targets. And that would bring me to my next slide. You have probably sort of followed, I'm sorry for this, it doesn't look like that on my screen, so please, it's not the best presentation, but if you follow sort of the latest decisions or advisory opinions in the climate human rights sphere, there's a lot of talk around budgets and pathways. They're still a bit mixed up. In the Klimaseniorinnen judgment, they talk once about a carbon budget and they talk about a pathway to climate neutrality.
Yeah, I can go get the print.
It's all good. But what is sort of at the core on these, what is sort of the tone that you can take is that states are obliged to make calculations, and that these calculations are now very feasible and very doable. But what is still very much unclear is sort of which budget is feasible and fair, because the Paris Agreement does talk about different types of responsibilities for different states. And there is a lot of unclarity around it. And we tried to push the court to making some boundary statements on this. We'll see whether that happens, because obviously it does play a role on where do you draw the line. What you can derive from Klimaseniorinnen is that it says even under an equal per capita approach would be the approach to say you take equals per capita for each state, and that would be the sort of the budget that they have. That is sort of maybe the minimum amount of fairness, which is not fair if you really look at it from a historical responsibility, but that might be the way that the court is leaning toward. Now, if you look at the next slide, and thank you very much to my co-presenter, you can see that Austria is clearly not on track. Austria is on track to produce at least 3.6 times more emission than under the highest estimate of its equal per capita. Even with additional measures and to comply with EU set targets, Austria is not on track. I'm showing this to you because there's a lot of the graphs we also use in the observations to make it clear that, you know, there is a ruling that needs to be made with regards to the relation of EU climate law and the European Convention of Human Rights. But it also plays into another element of this case, which is what do you ask from the court? And of course, you ask to say, well, to declare that there is an infringement on Article 8 and Article 8 and Article 13, but we also have requested general measures. Next slide, please. And that is has sort of happened in an environmental case in Italy recently, and this is also the line that now you can see the Board of Ministries is going with regards to the implementation of the Klimaseniorinnen judgment. But it's really to say, you need to say more than there is a violation of Article 8, because these deficiencies are a systemic problem, and Austria has already run out of its carbon budget. We've submitted to the court various carbon budgets calculations, and depending on the methodologies applied, it has either the carbon budget for 1.5 has either run out in 2025 or is about to run out like now. And that means, because of that situation, the consequence is twofold. And that is, you need to really order immediate reduction of emissions and general measures. And that will be the next slide. This is sort of what we requested the court to order. And this is an adaptation of the Klimaseniorinnen, of what the court has found, but rather to sort of apply it and say, you know, there needs to be a periodical update. There needs to be a bit more of sort of constant checking. And in addition to that, and that's a bit bold, and I'm not sure if the court is going to follow, but it's logical, and it's in line with the European Scientific Advisory Board to say, well, any exceedance of the national carbon budget, and that would be my last slide, has to be compensated through support of direct emission reduction outside the territory. Now, it's very unclear how that could work. It is obviously somewhere in the Paris Agreement that, you know, that idea. And then there was a big question for us, are we going to expand on this idea, or are we going to just drop it to the court, that they start thinking, well, you have set an obligation for 1.5, this has run out. In terms of scientifically possible to achieve that by reduction alone, what is the consequence to make that come alive or keep it alive, that 1.5 legal obligation? We've left it to the open. I'm not sure if the court is actually going to touch on it, but I think that's where we need to push further to really build on Klimaseniorinnen and that very strong framework. And even if we don't succeed in expanding it on an individual level, to really keep these set of obligations and that framework alive, and especially to do that within the European Union. And that's that. Thank you so much for listening, and I apologize for my presentation and my lack for presentation skills, and thank you so much for co-presenting with me.
I can see that time is running, so I will try to shorten this talk. I don't have titles to share unless you mean my PhD with the Open University in the UK on the normative regulations of journalistic practice, which is actually relevant for what I'm going to talk about. The purpose of what I'm going to do in the next 8 minutes, if I see correctly.
Oh, no. Don't limit yourself to 8 minutes. I think
I don't want to abuse
it wouldn't be
people.
fair for you to limit you. Please exceed the
Okay.
time limit.
Thank you. Anyway, I'll try to keep the time. I will try to demonstrate how public communication has functioned as the integral element that it is of strengthening right-based climate and energy governance within the Stellar project. This is in contrast to just using communication as a side element to the work we are doing or to the purpose of the entire project, which has been discussed at length by previous speakers. I actually thought it was a very good idea to speak last because what you heard by most of the previous speakers in a way exhausted the point I wanted to originally make, which was my first slide, that the work we are doing is positioned in the constitutional context for the European Union's structure of core values. And of course, the EU Charter for Fundamental Rights is the landmark, the benchmark of the project. But there are other structures which we have engaged, and this all brings us back to the set of EU core values which are enshrined in the Treaty of the European Union. I wanted to highlight that in practical terms, this means that decisions on climate targets, energy infrastructures, transition measures, and so on, cannot be treated as purely political or technical choices. These must respect the procedural guarantees, such as access to information, public participation, and access to justice. And if the standards are not respected, they can be challenged before National Court of the Europe or the European courts. The energy transition operates with enforceable constitutional limits and not outside them. I think this is an important starting point when we are going to look how this displays into the communication environment, which we all operate in across Europe. But of course, I will be focusing mostly on the members of the Stellar project. Now, when I'm talking about, and this is my next slide, the communication challenges, I want to point two important features. First is a structural mismatch. Right-based climate and energy governance is legal, procedural, institution-focused, and complex, while the dominant communication environment which we operate in is generally commercially driven, platform-mediated, and attention-grabbing, and this creates a structural mismatch between the purposes of the legislation and the legal framework and the ability to ground it in the communication sphere. And it's a very important second element of this is the fact that commercial logic seems to shape the communication visibility of the issues we are discussing here. In a commercialized and digitalized communication ecosystem, there are some clear features which we need to consider, and we have considered when approaching this project and the work we've done in it. And these include that media revenue models are tied to traffic and engagement metrics. Platform algorithms prioritize content that generates strong emotional reactions and rapid interaction rather than understanding and analytical reflection. Detailed institutional or procedural analysis generally receives less visibility than sharp conflict-driven narratives. And an important issue which we've seen over the last 2 years very clearly internationally is that media owners, investors, the entire business ecosystem behind communication increasingly intervenes in shaping and limiting certain priorities and narratives on the field. Now, we've had to deal with all this. The last point I want to make here, and it's very essential for us as Bluelink, as an organization dealing with digital communication for over 25 years now, is that unlike traditional norm-bound watchdog journalism, which we used to be exposed to 10, 20 years ago, which has its own limitations, of course, the prevailing contemporary communication model is often structured around performance and ownership incentives, around business. It has no societal, democratic, or whatsoever normative commitment. So we cannot expect digital communication to serve any public interest purpose, democracy, and so on. Now, with all this in mind, what we have, I will just jump a bit to the further in the direction is what we have designed as an approach. Bluelink's methodology traditionally, which we plugged into this project, involves working on a structural level rather than thematic. We work with journalists and communicators not about covering a given topic, such as human rights, law, climate enforcement, or other. We try to strengthen the public conditions under which citizens can understand and exercise their procedural rights in this particular case. And this involves building a supportive participation infrastructure, which requires public communication that makes decision-making processes, participation safeguards, and remedies visible and intelligible by a great part of the public. Now, how do we do this? Our method includes training journalists in procedural literacy and offering them access to information, public participation, access to justice, and knowledge of the legal frameworks that enshrine them. Direct engagement with civic defenders of climate, environment, and human rights, but also with litigators, legal experts, and decision makers to clarify the constitutional reasoning before participation. We do workshops and other formats that combine learning and production. So not only teaching, but also getting communicators to put their hands on the actual process of doing this complex task, and cross-border publication and amplification. We try to connect the different countries. And one very recent new development, which I'm tempted to share for a second, is that we are now trying to look more strategically at voluntarily self-regulating the way we, as civil society at least, use digital communication. So we need to be able to do it in a more responsible way if we expect the rest of the communication environment to become more supportive of the purposes of our work. Now, what did we do at Stellar? And this is, I think, the more practical part. We tried to implement, to address the challenges I spoke about earlier. The principal approach included anchoring communication in concrete litigation cases, focused on procedural rights in energy governance, but placing it in the broader political and social context so that it could be linked to the interest and emotional, whatever, engagement of the audiences. Integrated the charter-based reasoning directly into storytelling and other communication practices that engage audiences, and addressed the digital communication pressures described earlier by adapting to formats and guidance in the implementation of the project. But the core principle is that we do not treat communication as dissemination. We treat it as an essential layer between legal enforcement and democratic participation. And I think this is a very key contribution of the project. The communication activities, I don't want to bother you much with them, but you heard already in the beginning by Csaba, most of them. What I actually wanted to highlight and spend maybe the last 1 minute, because I'm already beyond midday, is the international workshop in Budapest. Now, I want to make a clarification that we keep calling it International Journalism Workshop, but an important element and step ahead with this workshop is that we brought for the first time digital communicators. We tried to see how the traditional approaches of training journalists based on their journalistic norms and ethical and professional requirements could relate to the new situation we're in, whereby no such requirements apply on the digital communication. What was really interesting is how the workshop, and here, I'm going already to slide 5 now. Yeah, thank you, Csaba. No, I'm still back, sorry. The Budapest workshop operationalized the elements I spoke about earlier. The first and interesting example is the Hungarian Constitutional Court climate ruling, which I'm sorry we couldn't hear more about today, but it really changed the mind of many of us, participants and experts, about how litigation can actually operate in absolutely unexpected environments and, first of all, achieve effect. Second of all, become a really attractive field for storytelling. We connected this to the existing legislative follow-up in Hungary, or not existing. We'll see. Csaba can tell us what's going on with this new climate bill that is supposed to be developed as a result, but also a very outstanding institution, the Future Generations Ombudsman, which is really a benchmark for Hungary for the past decades. And then we had cases from Czechia and Poland, from Bulgaria on SLAPS, from Austria, and overview of the European Court for Human Rights. So we made sure that this group of European journalists and communicators could find the relevant hooks for their further work to achieve the task. And we performed the experts, the guest speakers performed case-based legal briefings. I have to say one of them was a Constitutional Court judge of Hungary who, I mean, it's not often that as a communicator you have the ability to speak directly to such a person. A direct dialogue between participating judges, litigators, officials, and reporters, structured story development sessions, and dedicated discussion. And one last point, that particularly in the structural session, we brought in a new co-moderator, apart from my antiquated abilities and knowledge of traditional journalistic norms as a practitioner and a scientist. We also brought a younger lifestyle blogger, book author, and a digital communicator, Reka Nagy, who actually covered the new field, the new communication field. As a result, and that's the last slide on this one, thank you, Csaba, 36 participants, 14 countries, 20 publications, and cross-border amplification. My last, and I'm finishing here, my last slide is the lessons learned and recommendations. Lessons learned. Courts and litigation are providing strong narrative anchors. Its judicial decisions offer clear institutional reference point, and they help structure complex energy debates. So that is an important thing for communicators and journalists alike. Legislative follow-up is also important wherever that exists. That makes the stories more attractive and the audience is more interested in what's going to happen. Comparative perspectives strengthen legitimacy. So comparing different member states, national dispute situations, and we already have such stories published as a result of the project, including on national television. That is really I think, encouraging. Mixed communication cultures can collaborate effectively, meaning structured interaction between norm-bound journalism and digital communication. Production commitment ensures impact, requires concrete publication outputs. Requiring concrete publication outputs transforms training into a measurable cross-border media result. And the final lesson learned, as I mentioned, good practices may emerge in the most unexpected context. We have member states perceived as lagging in EU implementation sometimes, but exactly there we find really encouraging cases. So we should be always open for good practices. And the recommendations are different target groups. Legal practitioners should present litigation as enforcement of institutional duties and clarify procedural standards and consequences. Human rights and environmental defenders, our primary stakeholder group, should systematically document participation and access to information failures and connect cases to the EU Charter guarantees and other EU law, and we heard much better arguments for this earlier. Media and advocacy support organizations and donors need to combine training and theoretical teaching with publication pipelines and structured dialogue between journalists and legal experts. And finally, regulators and decision makers, where possible, need to treat participation and access to justice as core components of energy governance and ensure accelerated measures remain charter compliant. But this is, of course, and this is my final word, in case they and we all abide and want to abide to the EU core values and purposes that I started with and that underlied Stellar's project implementation. Thank you very much for your time and patience.